everybody, and welcome to DC Fine Art. This is part 2 to the oil pastel, where we are working on the skin around his face and around his beak, and then also his cone on the top of his head. But then also we're going to be working on his beak. Now, you're going to see me do a lot of the repetitive, kind of the same kind of process. Um, like, I work in layers. So the very first layer that I usually put down, I like to blend it out just a little bit to kind of give it that underpainting kind of look. So that way, whenever I go on top of my pastels or my oil pastels and layer them on top with different shades, whether it's a lighter color or a darker color, if any of the basically that board is a beige color, if instead of having that show through, if the underlayer shows through, then I'm perfectly fine with that. So I like to have those multiple different colors in my pictures or in my paintings with the oil pastels. And also, if you're working with pastels and you're just like not for sure on the colors that I threw in so many different colors. It was kind of crazy. I even went from purples to reds to pinks to flesh tones to just browns, like there's like a dark umber, like brown umber I threw in there. It's just, I even a rust color. I think I even used like a rusty kind of color. But it's not about just adding what color to match like identical to the reference photo. That wasn't going to happen because I didn't have the exact colors to match what the reference photo looks like. And if you want to know what the reference photo is, I got it from Pixabay. It is a free, royalty free to use picture that you can get there, and I'll actually post the link down below for you guys if you guys want to see that. um, but I don't match everything entirely to the reference photo because I don't have all those colors. Now I'll kind of mix them up, maybe layer it a little bit different, but I just get close. It's not perfect, but it's close. And you can still get the depth and everything that you're getting. It's just whether or not you're adding your darks and your lights. It's all about your dark and your lights to be able to add that depth to it. But how my steps usually go whenever I start out a painting or do any of this kind of work, I do blend it out with OMS. And you can see it right there. I'm kind of blending it out. I use the OMS as just kind of blending out that first layer to give me kind of like that underpainting kind of look. Now, I love the looks of oil pastels. So I definitely want to keep that oil pastel look. In order to get where I have that oil pastel look, once it dries, I'll go over the top of it, either add in some lights, add in some darks, and I'll keep a lot of those textures that the oil pastel brings. The only reason why I blend a lot with the OMS starting out is that way when I put my oil pastels on top and I'm layering on top of them, it kind of gives it a more smoother look underneath instead of having some of that board show through and look kind of, like, I don't even know what kind of color they're, like that sand kind of looked to the board. Instead, I would rather have my oil pastel first layer, my underpainting kind of showing through if it does. And also, whenever I'm doing the OMS, a lot of the times when I do use it, I like to use it either for the underpainting part, if I'm wanting that underpainting to kind of show through, or I'm actually blending it out so that way I can transition from one color to the other and kind of blend them in just a little bit instead of using my finger. Because I don't really like to get my fingers that dirty. I know I had gotten them dirty and I was like, wow. But I usually use the brush to kind of blend out and smooth one layer into the other, just that little fine edge. That way it's a lot smoother. And that's pretty much what I do. Now, I do use OMS, like if I'm trying to get fine detail, I will use OMS, rub it into the color I want just to kind of get some finer details. I will use the brush for that. So here I'm just kind of smoothing out a little bit of those darker like creases here and there. I don't want to blend out all my highlights or anything like that because then they're gone and I would have to re-put them in. So I still want the texture and everything the oils pastels bring. Still kind of working in around that crease in the eye. And I will have to go a little bit darker on that. So I will end up coming back and like using like a dark umber to kind of put in a little bit more of a darker shade in there. And I'll end up throwing in some more highlights. But I definitely use multiple different colors in this. And by using multiple colors instead of just one solid color or two solid colors, but just throwing in a bunch of colors that are similar, or you got that transition from light to dark, really does add a lot of character to your painting. Here I'm just kind of adding in some little fine wrinkles in there. Here I'm going through and adding some more highlight. And then I'm putting in a little bit of a low light in there because it kind of had a little bit of a shadow, like it kind of went down into a little bit darker area. So I just kind of put that back in. And just kind of tapping it right in and around those little creases that I made, or those little wrinkles I made. Then I'm tapping this in and it's a little bit more of a darker like tone, so that way it kind of shades down, has that shadow. Now this is an even darker color, so this is a purple. Now here's the brown umber, or at least dark umber. That's what I'm going to go back in and add some more darker lines and shadows. And see how I'm just kind of tapping in and just kind of adding more color, adding more highlights or lowlights, depending on which way I want to go with it. Now I'm going to blend it out with just a little bit of OMS. It ain't a whole bunch on my brush, but it's just enough so where I can kind of blend it out a little bit, but I'm not completely washing it away or creating a complete, like a whole entire paint, palette out of it. I just use some of my access there just to kind of put in a little shadow. Now this was definitely done in multiple layers, so I had to go back and forth with it, just kind of adding in my highlights or adding in my lowlights. And now I'm doing this little piece of like a part of his little skin that kind of hangs down here on the side. I had some dark shadows and some lights that were reflecting in it, so I did start out with like a lighter color and then just kind of went around where the highlight was. But it's something that you just kind of play around with, and if you need to go a little darker, then you can always make it a little darker. um, Not necessarily do you want to go too light to where then you can't add your lights back into it, but you can also, these are very easy to tone it down, so you can easily take a little bit of a darker color, go on top of it, smooth it over, and then you can add your highlights to it the way you wanted it. So it is a very forgiving medium. Adding in some of my darker shadows there. And now I'm just kind of smoothing it out with my brush. And see, that highlight was a little bit too bright, so I'm kind of toning it back a little bit by blending it out just a little bit. Had a little bit too much OMS on it. As you can see, that board loves to absorb the OMS, so it just kind of spreads out if you end up putting too much on. But in that case, if you do put a little bit too much on and it does spread out, like if you're using the Appersand pastel board, you don't have to worry about that mark being there. It totally dries out and it'll be gone. So just takes a little bit of time and it dries out fine. That's if you get carried away like me and put a little bit too much down. Really didn't need that much. Sometimes I don't really watch. Usually I use a little OMS, and usually I just kind of like brush on the side of the little canisters, so that way I'm kind of getting as much as I can back off of it, and then I'll take and swipe it on my paper towel, and that way I kind of get a little bit more off to where I don't have a sopping wet brush. But sometimes whenever I get caught up in my art and I'm working really quick and I'm just kind of in my own realm, should I say, sometimes I just dunk it in there and try to swipe and I skip the towel part and then I end up with something like that. But it's no biggie. If it does happen, it will dry out. So here I am just adding basically layer upon layer, the skin, basically doing like a mid-tone, adding some highlights to it, some low lights like where their little wrinkles would be, and then just kind of blending them out slightly, and then I'll have to go back over it and add back in my highlights if needed. I'm kind of bringing that up and over, kind of merging that shadow and just kind of bringing it up because I kind of want it to go together, so at least a little bit more smoothly. And here's like a darker area in his skin, like around his neck, like that hangs down. I think they call it, I don't know if they call it a beard, like the same thing of a turkey, but I guess it's the beard of a rooster. So I'm adding in my darks, and then I'll have to adjust it by putting in some more dark shadows in there. I'll end up blending that out because you can see if I just went over it like that, then you still have some of that board showing through. And I want it to be more like a smooth transition instead of using my finger and just blending away with my finger. I probably wouldn't have no finger left, by the way, because Appersand board is like kind of like a little bit like sandpapery like, so it is kind of got a rough texture to it. So if I were to blend with my finger, I probably wouldn't have a finger left. So and and then plus that I would have it on my fingers and that would really bother me. I don't know. I can handle like soft pastel, blending it with my fingers, just about, a lot of other things, but for some reason, oil pastel is definitely my thing that I don't really like to get it on my fingers. If I get it on my fingers, I'm like, ugh, it just bothers me. Just, I don't know. Oil pastel is the one that bothers me, I guess, to get on my fingers. I think it's more like a lipstick type of feeling and or that tacky kind of feel, and I don't know. I don't mind doing soft pastel and getting on my fingers because it's more like chalky powder, but this here is just, I don't know. It's just my weird thing. But I did find a way to just go ahead and just do it this way, which I saw, it was a while ago, and I was looking into the oil pastels. And I think it was Karen Dosh that did it, but they did like a demonstration of their oil pastels, and they had their water soluble oil pastels. So, if those of you who are probably not wanting to go with oil pastels and blending with OMS, which I usually use the Gamsol anyway, it's like supposed to be more like, I guess, environmental friendly. But if anybody doesn't really like that, then they do have oil pastels that are water soluble. Now, I have seen those. I have never tried them though, so I can't really tell you a whole bunch. I just know I heard about them. I kind of seen a little bit, but I never purchased them, so I don't know how they work. I mean, I would think that they would work similar to these. I mean, they are. I don't know. I really don't know. I can't tell you guys too much, but I have heard about them. But Karen Dosh put out a video showing what all you could do with the oil pastels that they had. And so they took some of their OMS or mineral spirits and they went ahead and used it and started blending some of their oil pastels. And I seen it, and they were doing like a flower, and they went over it with their odorless mineral spirits and turned it into like paint like substance. And I was just like, wow, I was really amazed by it. I was like, well, that's really cool because that opens up a door to branch out. If you're wanting to add in more details, like if you're more detail orientated like me, I like details, then I mean, it really does open up a door because trying to use these sticks are definitely, I mean, to try and get those small details. I know with oil or with soft pastels, you can like break them or you can use the sharp edges, but with oil pastels, you're working with something that's really soft and squishy. And yeah, it's hard to get those fine edges unless you use the backside of the oil pastel, but then that goes away quick. So, and then if you wanted to blend it out on a separate piece of paper to try and get that sharp edge, you could, but then I just see a lot of oil pastels kind of going down the drain, because you're using up your oil pastels. And I know they're pretty pricey, so to me, using the OMS and creating details without having to get my fingers dirty, without having to waste a bunch of my oil pastels, which are pretty pricey, I use the OMS, and I actually really do enjoy doing it this way. So, but I mean, everybody is different, and I understand that. And what works for one may not work for the other, but it's definitely something that I do enjoy, and I wanted to spread that to others. And at least be able to show what you guys can do with them too, because it does make a lot of possibilities. You know, it branches out that medium a little bit more of what you could do with them. Now, like I said here, I was kind of blending out a little bit more of my highlights out there. I don't think I really liked the highlights that I had in it, so I wanted to re-put that in. So I'm actually going to let that dry, and I'm going to go back in and readjust those highlights the way I want them. There we go. Because I like it to have some texture. Now I'm adding some in here where the shadowy part is since it's dry, and I'll add in a little bit of texture in the shadow too. Here I'm adding in some more. This is his little nose, and it had like this little thing coming out of his nose, and went ahead and added that in. I put in the colors, and then I'll have to go back in with my OMS and kind of blend that out a little bit. And see, I just go back in, add some more shadows, some darker areas here. Now I had a big thing of feathers, like a clump of feathers right in that area, so that's what that circle is there for. Adding a little bit more highlight. And I did get a little bit more quicker as I'm going right now. It's because it's kind of the same repetitive thing over and over again of just layering upon layering, adding in your darks, putting in your lights, making sure you have a mid-tone in there so that way you can go either a little darker or a little brighter. Now the beak, whenever I get to that here, well, actually in this little area here, I'm just kind of blending it in. And I'll show you a little bit more of a close-up here so that way you can kind of see some of the textures that I have in here with the oil pastel. See that texture that the oil pastels give? I still love that texture, so I definitely wanted to keep that in there. Got that skin type of tone with my lights and darks. I don't know. To me, kind of looks like a dinosaur. It'll look like a rooster once it's done, but for right now, it looks like a dinosaur, like a prehistoric bird. But I love the oil pastels. I love those textures that it has with using the oil pastels. And I'm keeping that. I'm not blending it completely out to make it just into paint, you know, not blending it out to where it makes soup and then putting it on there, but I'm creating an underpainting underneath and then I'm layering on top of it. And if I'm not liking the layer that I'm adding on top of it, then maybe I might smooth it out just a little bit in some areas and I'll keep some texture in there and then I'll go on top of it and relayer again and again to where I have multiple layers with my oil pastels and it has that oil pastel look. And I know it's sped up a little bit, but this is kind of the same kind of concept that I'm doing, except I'm just going to go all over his little cone for his head. And it's just going to be a bunch of me putting in my darks to where my dark lines are. And then I'll go back in and fill it in with kind of like a mid-tone. And if I need to go back in again and add some darker tones to my little creases and lines, then I will, or add some highlights to it. And then we'll be off to the beak. Now here I'm blending it out. This was probably the most blending that I did throughout this whole painting, just blending. I did a lot of blending. I tried not to blend out my lines completely, like my creases or anything like that, but I definitely wanted to smooth it out. I wanted to create that underpainting underneath. And I didn't want any of that, you know, board to show through. So I definitely had to blend a lot because it's such a massive area. And I know I had that little white you can see that I added in there. That's just going to be blended out and it'll just be a lighter spot in that area. It won't be too noticeable. I know it had a white spot in it, but yeah, I didn't want to do the speckles of white in there. I am going to do some highlights, but it's just a little highlighted part area in that area. I hope that made sense in that area, But see how I made a little lighter in that general spot. I had to change my words. So after that dries, I'm going to go back in and then I'm going to add some highlights to it. And if it doesn't look like, I tried using my finger, like tried, and I got it on my finger, looked at my finger, was like, oh, no, you know, and I kept on trying to force myself to try and use my fingers to blend, but I have such an issue with it because then it gets on my hands and I feel like my hands are all dirty. So I did attempt it. I just find it so much easier just to use my brush. But I did give it my best shot. So here I'm just kind of adding in some textures, some lights. I will go back in and kind of blend these out just a little bit. I won't blend them completely out, but I just want to blend them out enough to where they're a little bit more softer toned and you can still see them, but they're not like in your face, standing out, these polka dots everywhere. So I will kind of blend them and tone them down just a hair so that way they're not just too much, you know? It's where you can lightly see them. Otherwise, it looked like my rooster has some issues here. He's got chicken pox. Oh boy. I think that was one of my jokes that I couldn't pass up. I think maybe he's got chickenpox. He is a rooster. But here comes the beak. Okay, you guys. So I am going to go ahead and add this dark little portion in here. If you have the reference photo, like I said, the reference photo is in the link description below. You can get that. But I'm just kind of adding in my darker areas first. And yes, I'm just using my Omas and wiping it across my oil pastels, creating kind of like a paint light substance, so that way I can go back in and create that underpainting with the dark. Plus that it's really hard to do really fine details on something with um, the oil pastels, just the sticks. So I definitely use the brush to help me out. Adding a little bit of blue just for some reflection. Here's kind of like a grayish tone. And I'm just doing what I see on the reference photo is basically all I'm doing. I'm creating this yellow. This is kind of like the underpainting. So I mean, if it does show through, you might have some of this yellowish kind of color show through. And here I'm kind of darkening it by adding a little bit more to it, a little bit more pigment to it, blending it out. Now I'm adding in some more of a lighter yellow for a highlight, and see how I'm kind of blending that out into it. A little bit of a highlight there underneath. Adding some darker tone of yellow in there. Some shadow. And then putting in some black on that darker tone. Yellow and then brown. And just kind of transitioning from dark to a light. When it goes from brown to a darker yellow to a little bit lighter to the lightest. Adding in some little speckles. Some light colors for the highlights. And some white. And now I'm just going to blend it out just to where the edges of it, I'm just going to smooth them out. That way it does a smooth transition from one color to the other, not blending it completely out. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up part 3, and there is basically what we got done on part 3. If you guys are new to my channel, please click the like and subscribe. I'd love to have you guys on here. Plus that, click the little bell notification. That way YouTube can remind you whenever I come out with my part 3, or maybe even the Powerful Pack box, which I have got, and I will be doing a box opening on the Powerful Pack for January 2023. So yeah, and to all my subscribers who have already subscribed, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye, you guys.